Hey guys, tonight we drift into candlelit corridors and tapestry-laden chambers to uncover the quiet treacheries and forbidden secrets of medieval queens. Jewels glimmer, silk rustles, and somewhere just beyond the velvet curtain, a dagger gleams in the flicker of a torch. This isn't the fairy tale version you remember. Behind every smile, behind every courtly bow, something darker waited. And tonight, you're going to walk right into it. Now, you probably won't survive this if you're expecting some polite Tudor dinner party. Because what queens did behind closed doors, it was often anything but regal. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. That's always fun. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't enter the castle through the main gate tonight. You drift in softly, almost like a spirit, your footsteps silent on damp stone. The air is thick with incense, clove, and rose, and the cold licks at your ankles like an animal in wait. You're in the court of Queen Isabella of France, wife to Edward II, and your instincts prickle something is terribly wrong. The tapestries on the wall boast of piety and marriage, but they're hiding cracks, literal ones in the wall and metaphorical ones in the monarchy. Isabella was called the she-wolf of France, but you won't hear that from the monks chronicling her deeds. No, they speak of her as a mother, a consort, a bearer of royal blood. But you're standing too close to believe that. You hear a voice from the shadows, a whisper. It's Isabella speaking in low tones to a messenger cloaked in browns and blacks. You lean in closer. She's not praying. She's plotting. Against her husband. Against the king. Because Edward the Fool has given his heart and too much power to Piers Gaveston, his favorite. And Isabella. She's humiliated, sidelined, seething beneath layers of French silk. You move slowly now along the edges of this secret meeting. Your fingers graze the walls, rough and ancient, and then the scene shifts. Another queen appears, this time Eleanor of Aquitaine. It's the 12th century now, and you find yourself in Poitiers, France. She's older than you expected, sharp-eyed, unapologetically clever. Eleanor, queen to two kings, Louis VII of France and Henry II of England, is dangerous in the way fire is dangerous, controlled until it isn't. They say she rode bare-breasted into battle with the Second Crusade, inspiring troops as she defied the Pope, the Church, and all common sense. Whether that's true or not, no one can prove it. But the whispers have lasted for centuries. She's sitting by a carved wooden desk, poring over letters, love letters. Some hers, some intercepted. She's kept them all tucked under bolts of damask and willed into secrecy. One is from a troubadour poet nearly ruined by his infatuation. One is to her daughter, warning her of life with a violent man. What Eleanor doesn't know is that her sons, 3 of them now fully grown, will rise against their father, Henry II, with her blessing. She'll be imprisoned for years in a tower for her part in the rebellion. That's the price of ambition. But right now, she's just a woman trying to outmaneuver a man who thinks he's cleverer. She scratches out a note, folds it, and seals it with a signet ring shaped like a hawk. You feel the ground shift again. The air grows colder, and you hear bells tolling over water. London again. Now you're standing in the echo of another queen's footsteps, Anne Boleyn. It's 1536. She's walking toward the scaffold at the Tower of London, her crimson skirts brushing the boards. You try to reach her to speak, but she doesn't see you. Her lips are moving. She's rehearsing. Not prayers, her final speech. Anne's sin was seduction, of course. That's what the court wanted the world to believe. But her true crime was political. Too clever, too persuasive, too Protestant. Henry VIII had once written love letters with shaky hands and called her his one true queen. Now he's watching from a window, impassive, already married to the next. Anne kneels. The sword is French. Quick, clean, no axe for her. But you're not done. Not yet. You slip through time again, passing through centuries like veils. Now you're in Denmark, walking alongside Queen Margaret I. She was crowned not just Queen of Denmark, but regent over Norway and Sweden as well, a woman wielding power across all of Scandinavia. Her secret. She ruled in the name of her dead son long after his death. Let the nobles believe he lived, it bought her time, bought her influence, bought her peace. The court never questioned her too harshly. Fear has that effect. You sit beside her now in a cold hall of stone, and she leans in as though to confide. Her voice is low-shaped like frost. Sometimes you must lie to keep order, she says. Even about the dead, her fingers are draped with rings, symbols of the lands she controls. And you wonder how many queens through history wore jewels paid for with blood. How many ruled while hiding sins behind cloisters and crowns. You won't get the answers tonight. Not all of them. But there are more steps to climb, more doors to unlock, and more sins to uncover. And tonight, you're not going anywhere. Margaret's words echo behind you, drifting through stone and snow. You leave her court, but the idea clings that queens, for all their silks and ceremony, often wore masks more than crowns. And the deeper you walk into the halls of their histories, the more those masks start to slip. You find yourself now in Castile. The warm winds of 14th century Spain blow dust against your face. The court is louder here, perfumed and passionate, but just as layered in deception. Queen Maria of Portugal is sitting by an open window, watching the horizon, with eyes like coiled storms. Her husband, Alfonso XI, has taken a mistress and given her a seat of power. Eleanor de Guzman, a woman with influence and legitimacy, Maria can't challenge in public. Not yet. But behind closed doors, there are rumors that Maria tried to poison Eleanor, that she sent spies into her rival's chambers, that she kept lists, names of those loyal to the mistress, names of those who could be persuaded to turn. You watch as she dips a quill into ink the color of dried blood and writes slowly, deliberately. It's not a letter. It's an order. Later you'll hear that after Alfonso dies, Maria has Eleanor arrested and executed without a trial. A quiet, brutal revenge. You turn your head, disturbed by the cold calm in her expression. Her sin was not jealousy. It was vengeance. Ice-plated and royal. Then, so suddenly, it almost startles you. You're somewhere colder still. You're walking along the edge of a loch mist, curling around your ankles. Scotland. 16th century. And at the center of this fog is Mary, Queen of Scots. You follow her into a dimly lit chapel where candles flicker over stained glass and secrets. Mary was crowned at just 6 days old, married into French royalty, widowed young, and returned to a Scotland that barely remembered her. She married Lord Darnley, a man handsome on the outside and toxic beneath. The mistake thinking she could handle him. But here's where things get dark. Darnley is murdered, strangled, and then blown to pieces in a suspicious explosion. And Mary, she marries the man most believe killed him, James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell. Was she forced? Was it love or was it strategy? She never said. But the scandal is deafening. You walk with her now past the echoing whispers in the halls, past the courtiers who lower their eyes when she passes. She's wearing mourning black, but her spine is steel. She's already planning her next move. But it won't matter. The lords will rebel. She'll be imprisoned. And finally, she'll flee only to be held captive by her cousin Elizabeth I for 19 years. They'll execute her too, eventually. But not yet. Tonight she's still a queen, and you're standing close enough to see the blood beneath her fingernails. Now the wind shifts again. The language changes around you. You're in Hungary now, in the dark chambers of Queen Elizabeth of Bosnia. She wasn't born to rule, but when her husband Louis XIII died suddenly, she took the regency for their daughter. She didn't wait for permission. The nobles squirmed under her control. They whispered that she was only a puppet, a placeholder, a mother clinging to power. But Elizabeth, she sent assassins to silence dissent. She forged alliances with steel and fear. One rumor says she had a rival noblewoman strangled in a bath and buried in the forest. You're standing now in that forest just beyond the tree line, and the silence is thick, the grave unmarked, but the echo of it never really left the court. Back in the palace, Elizabeth kneels in front of an altar, muttering prayers that don't sound very holy. Her daughter is watching, learning. Soon, the enemies will come for them both. She knows that. But tonight, she's still holding the strings. And what of the others? What of queens who sinned quietly, who hid their transgressions, not with blood, but with beauty? You drift now into Burgundy. The court is full of color, reds and golds, music playing from viols and flutes. Queen Joan, Navarre, is sipping from a glass of wine, her face unreadable. They accused her of witchcraft, you know. Not in the peasant sort of way, but in the sophisticated queenly kind. Love potions, herbal brews, spells whispered into the king's ear. It wasn't enough that she had royal blood. She had influence, and influence frightened the wrong men. So, was she guilty? That's the wrong question. The better one is, how many kings listened to their wives' counsel, then blamed them when things turned sour? You hear a splash and turn. The wineglass has tipped. Joan is still seated, unmoving. She's watching you. Or maybe not you, someone behind you. A threat. A servant with too much curiosity. Or a bishop who talks too much. You step back. You don't belong in her presence any more than the truth does. And then back across the sea. You find yourself in England again, in a bedroom heavy with tapestries and thick drapes. The fire is low, barely crackling. A figure stirs in bed. It's Queen Catherine Howard, fifth wife to Henry VIII. A teenager still, pretty, playful, fatally naive. She keeps secrets beneath her mattress, letters from Thomas Culpeper, the man she loved before and possibly during her marriage to the king. The letters are breathless, ink-stained with affection and desperation, and they will be her undoing. You move toward the bed, careful not to wake her. She sighs in her sleep, lips moving as though whispering to someone just beyond the veil. Maybe it's Culpeper. Maybe it's the girl she used to be back when she still thought love and politics were separate things. She will be dragged to the tower soon. Crying, screaming, begging. But not tonight. Tonight she dreams, and you are her only witness. You retreat now slowly, carefully into silence again. So many chambers, so many queens, each one carrying sins like a second crown, heavier hidden and far more costly. But you're only halfway through this castle of shadows, and the worst is still ahead. You leave Catherine Howard behind, the last echoes of her laughter still trapped in the folds of velvet and lace. It fades like steam off a morning goblet, and soon you're passing under heavy wooden arches again. The air tightens. The walls feel closer. Next, you're in Bohemia. Queen Barbara of Chile waits in a high turret perched like a falcon above the capital. They called her the Messalina of the Germans, a name borrowed from Rome's most scandalous empress, meant to sting. The chronicles say she was immoral, lustful, reckless, but it was her ambition that truly frightened them. Barbara was married to Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund. She didn't just stand beside him, she demanded power coins, land, respect. Her court was rumored to be decadent, her tastes indulgent. Some said she dabbled in alchemy, searching for elixirs to stretch her reign past the limits of time. You descend the tower where she once stood, the stone steps winding like a serpent beneath your feet. There's a locked room at the bottom, and behind the heavy oak door, you can almost hear the metallic clink of vials, the rustle of parchments scrawled with secrets. Whether they were healing salves or poisons, no one ever proved. Barbara ruled in her own right, once her husband died, and when the nobles moved to strip her titles, she resisted not with soldiers, but with something subtler. Documents, blackmail, the leverage only a queen with decades of listening could wield. The room smells of old parchment and smoke. You can still feel her presence here, sharp, calculating, restless. Now the air grows colder like breath drawn through iron bars. You find yourself walking beside another prisoner, Queen Margaret of Anjou. England is in chaos again, as it often is in your travels, and the wars of the roses have just begun to bloom like blood-red flowers across the countryside. Margaret is no passive consort. Married to Henry VI, a king better suited to prayer than politics, she rules in his name when his mind slips away. She leads armies. She arranges treaties. She decides who lives and who disappears. But the nobles whisper again that her son, Prince Edward, is not the king's at all, but the result of some shadowy affair. No proof, just the poison of gossip, sharp and slow. Margaret never answers the accusation. She doesn't need to. She lets the boy speak for her confident, combative, every inch a commander in waiting. You sit now in her tent deep in winter, the wind battering the canvas walls. Her eyes are red from sleepless nights, but her hands are steady as she seals a letter with a wax stamp shaped like a lion. She doesn't flinch when the messenger arrives with grim news. York's forces are advancing. She folds the letter. She lifts her chin. She does not confess. Queens never do. And again, the centuries draw you further down their hallway. You drift now into Naples, into the world of Queen Joanna I, a place of color and corruption, of perfumed courts and poisoned cups. Joanna's reign is shadowed from the start. She's accused of murdering her first husband, Andrew of Hungary, after he grew too ambitious. The details are murky. He was found hanged from a window, his body twisted in moonlight. The court claimed it was bandits, or enemies of the crown, but most believed she knew, that she had ordered it, or allowed it, or simply looked the other way. She faced trial in Avignon, yes, a queen on trial for murder. Unthinkable even then. But she was acquitted and returned to rule, not with caution, with fire. You're in her garden now, fragrant with citrus and secrets. She walks past you barefoot, her hem brushing rosemary and rue. Her guards follow silently, always just far enough behind not to hear what she murmurs to the statues. They say she believed the dead spoke in whispers, that they guided her hands. Perhaps they did. She ruled for decades, married 4 times, outlived empires. Her sins weren't buried, they were cultivated like vines along a stone wall. Now the gardens fall away, and you're moving east into the splintering chaos of Byzantium. The air turns golden. The mosaics shimmer in lamplight. And there, in the heart of Constantinople, you find Empress Theodora, not of the circus, but Theodora Cantacuzene, wife to John VI. Byzantine politics are a knife's edge, and Theodora walks it barefoot. She kept her husband's enemies close, sometimes even at her table. She played factions against each other, spoke softly, while swords clashed in the streets. Her sin was subtlety. While her husband wore the crown, Theodora spun the web that kept them both in power. You're in the throne room now, watching as she pretends to drowse beside the emperor while listening to her advisors' every word. Later, those who crossed her will find their titles revoked, their ships confiscated, their alliances unraveled. You move through a curtain and find yourself in a small chamber filled with coins bearing her likeness. A rare honor, and one that made more than a few bishops uncomfortable. A woman's face in every merchant's hand. A reminder of who truly ran the empire when the torches burned low. And now another figure appears in the shadow. You are in Sweden. Queen Christina stands at the window of her icy palace, staring out over a land she never quite learned to love. She was crowned king, not queen-styled that way in the official documents, because her court couldn't fathom a woman ruling without a man beside her. But she had no intention of marrying. Her sins were many, at least to her contemporaries. She dressed in men's clothing. She filled her court with philosophers, actors, dancers. She converted to Catholicism in a staunchly Lutheran realm. She abdicated her throne voluntarily and vanished across Europe, leaving scandal behind her like perfume on a pillow. You walk with her now through a hallway lined with mirrors. Her reflection watches you from every angle. She's smiling, but not kindly. There are rumors, of course, of women she loved, of secrets traded in Rome, of attempts to reclaim her crown by any means. But tonight, Christina speaks to no one. She glides past the mirrors, vanishing into the dim corridor beyond. And you follow. You move slowly now, quieter than before. The stone beneath your feet is colder, and there's a kind of hush in the air, as though the walls themselves are listening. Christina is gone. Her presence lingers only in the scent of oiled wood and candle smoke. You pass through the final arch of her memory, and the doors close behind you like a sigh. Ahead is darkness again. Not cruel, but deep, dense. And then faint candlelight emerges, spilling out into a narrow corridor, leading you toward a kingdom ruled by silence. You're in Russia now. The air is thick with incense and frost, and at the center of it all sits Sophia Alexeyevna. Not a queen, technically a regent. But don't let the title fool you. She held the power of czars in her ring-heavy hands. Her sin was ambition. Her tool was patience. After the death of her brother, she placed herself as guardian to the next Tsar, Peter the Great. But Peter was still a boy, and Sophia had no intention of stepping aside quietly. You find her in the Tarim Palace, seated before a wall of icons. Her lips move in prayer, but her eyes are sharp, calculating. Behind her, soldiers shuffle nervously. There's unrest outside. The Streltsy, the elite guard, are beginning to murmur discontent. Some say Sophia encouraged rebellion to tighten her grip. Others believe she merely failed to suppress it. The truth likely sits between those two shadows. What is clear is that once Peter came of age, he took his revenge with the precision of a surgeon. You walk with her through the halls of Novodevichy Convent, her forced prison. She was sent there by her own half-brother, stripped of her regency, her voice silenced by brick and prayer. But even there she remained dangerous. Even there the nuns stepped lightly around her. You hear her whisper as you pass. You cannot cage a mind. Only a mouth. You believe her. The light dims again, and you step now into a chamber layered in gold leaf and deception. Italy. Lucrezia Borgia. Her name alone is enough to twist the stomachs of popes and poets alike. But you pause now, not in judgment, but in curiosity. She stands before you in a velvet gown, her hair threaded with pearls. Her smile is soft, but not gentle. She offers a hand, but not out of courtesy, it's a test. Will you take it? Lucrezia was born into a family that made sin into statecraft, daughter of Pope Alexander VI, sister to the ruthless Cesare. She was married off, discarded, remarried, all for power. Rumors surrounded her like perfume. Poison rings, incest, betrayal, none confirmed, all believed. But here's what you do see. She ran Ferrara with intellect and calm. She patronized artists, built hospitals, and ruled during plague without fleeing. Her sins may not have been of her making, but she wore them well. You're in her study now. A letter lies open, its Latin, graceful, deliberate. She's writing not to a lover or priest, but to a merchant, negotiating grain during famine. Every line is veiled in strategy. And as you turn, you see the glint of something on her dressing table. A small vial, empty, labeled with a hand no longer living. You say nothing. You move on. France waits for you now, and with it Catherine de' Medici. Ah, Catherine, regal, ruthless, widow of Henry II, queen mother to 3 kings. She walks with slow grace through the halls of the Louvre, where oil lamps cast shadows that move just a little too slowly. They called her the Black Queen, feared her, blamed her for the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, said she ordered the slaughter of thousands of Protestants from behind a curtain, her voice as calm as a nun's. She once kept astrologers in her service, consulted horoscopes before marriage contracts, and maintained a cabinet of poisons. You see it now, a tall, narrow cupboard tucked in her private chamber, hidden behind tapestries. Each bottle meticulously labeled, some in Latin, some in symbols only she understood. You kneel and run a hand along the baseboards. There's a groove worn there as though someone had stood too long, too often. Watching. Listening, perhaps waiting. She passes by you now, not looking yet, somehow knowing you're there. Her perfume is lavender and dried orange peel. Later, her own son would write that she was never cruel, but always terrifying. And here, in this half-lit silence, you understand why. Now, as the halls of the Louvre vanish behind you, you arrive in Norway. The chill greets you like an old friend. Queen Margaret of Scotland, known in Norway as Margaret of Denmark, once married to King Haakon VI, left behind more than one mystery, but it's her namesake, her granddaughter known as Margaret the Maid of Norway, that catches your attention next. A child queen promised to the Scottish throne after Alexander III's death. But she died en route at the tender age of 7. Some claimed it was illness. Others believed it was murder. There was no war, no rebellion. Just an eerie silence after her death that hung over Scotland like a fog no wind could break. You're on the Orkney Islands now, where she is said to have breathed her last. The waves crash, disinterested, and the wind tangles your cloak. You stand outside a low stone house staring at the sea, wondering, was the child ever truly meant to rule? Or was she merely a pawn in a game played by older, colder hands? There's no answer, only the rhythm of waves on rocks. And then Portugal. Queen Leonor Teles. They called her manipulative, cold. She married King Ferdinand I under scandal, driving a wedge through the nobility. When he died, she tried to install her daughter's husband, a Castilian prince, as king. The people revolted. You're in Lisbon now. The streets are narrow, restless. A crowd gathers outside the palace, shouting for justice, for sovereignty, for blood. Inside, Leonor stands before a mirror, adjusting a jeweled clasp at her throat. Her face is unreadable. A servant rushes in news of rebellion. Leonor doesn't flinch. She's already packed. And when she flees, it's not in shame but strategy. She leaves behind a burning court and a war. You stare into the mirror she left behind. Your own reflection is starting to blur. The sins of queens are not always loud. Sometimes they're quiet, cold, waiting. And you're still not done walking through them. The mirror fades, and with it the image of Leonor's tight-lipped calm. You blink slowly, and the air around you begins to shift again, soft as silk unraveling in the dark. Now you're in Aragon. Queen Violent of Bar walks beside you, her steps careful on ancient tiled floors. She is a shadow beside King John, a wife chosen for alliance and bloodline. But it's not her husband's reign that people remember. It's the quiet storm she built in its shadow. Violent was clever. That was her sin. Not loud, not proud. Just sharp. And the sharper the woman, the deeper the suspicion. Her enemies said she meddled in politics, that she sowed discontent between noble houses, that she whispered things in the king's ear no queen should say out loud. Some even claimed she dabbled in the darker arts, that her chaplains were not all priests, that in the cool of night, prayers turned into bargains with something older than the church. You pass a garden where she once walked the roses, blooming too perfectly in the moonlight. The petals are deep red, almost too red. You think you hear her humming, but there's no one there. Her greatest secret, perhaps it was simply survival. When John died, she ruled as regent for their daughter, and not one noble dared to challenge her. The court called her the Lady of Iron, and the name stayed long after her body turned to dust. From there, time folds once more, and you're drawn into Austria. You're standing in the vast, echoing rooms of Empress Elizabeth Sisi, as history came to call her. It's the 19th century now, but the sins still smell the same. Sisi was beautiful, ethereal, haunted. Married to Emperor Franz Joseph I, but never quite at home in the stiff rituals of court. Her waist was famously tiny, her hair famously long, her soul famously restless. But what most didn't see was the weight of her silence. The death of her son Rudolf, officially a suicide, but surrounded by swirling rumors of political murder, forbidden love, and royal disgrace, broke something in her. You sit with her now in a private salon where every mirror is covered. She no longer wants to see her own face. Not since Rudolf's death. Not since her world collapsed behind a closed door at Meyerling. Some say she knew what was coming, that she'd read his letters, that she helped him hide the truth until it could no longer stay buried. The Empire never blamed her. They didn't dare. But they watched her fade. Diets of raw milk, obsessive exercise, long absences wandering through Europe in black lace and mourning. Her sin was grief. And in royal courts, grief especially, a mother's grief, was seen as dangerous. Now you step away from her shadow and enter a quieter space, a darker one. Ireland. The wind howls differently here. Not courtly, not perfumed, but wild, sharp. You're in the presence of a pirate queen now, Grania Neem Haile, called Grace O'Malley in English texts, though she'd spit at the name. She wasn't a queen in the crowned sense, but she ruled the seas, and when Elizabeth I of England tried to tame her coast, Grania resisted not with armies, but with ships, with trade, with cleverness. Her sins, to English eyes, everything. She defied male lords, took lovers, held castles, negotiated with monarchs like an equal. You're aboard one of her ships now, the wood creaking beneath your feet, sails whipping above. She stands at the helm, eyes squinting into the storm, salt and wind in her hair. She's a queen in all but name, and later she'll sail straight into the Lion's Den, London, to meet Elizabeth face to face. Two queens, two rulers, two women who refuse to kneel. You wonder what passed between them that day, what words were said that never made it into the letters or chronicles. Whatever it was, Elizabeth let her go, and Grania kept ruling. Now the sea vanishes, and you find yourself in Poland. Queen Jadwiga crowned as king, yes king, in 1384. A child ruler, barely 10. But even at 10, the weight of the crown was not unfamiliar. She ruled with grace, with diplomacy, with a voice far older than her years. But behind that grace were hard choices. Her marriage to Jogaila, Grand Duke of Lithuania, was meant to unite realms. She didn't love him. She didn't choose him. But she agreed for peace, for strategy. Still a legend lingers, that before the marriage she tried to flee, that she begged the court not to make her choose duty over desire. She lost that battle, but not the war. You find her in Wawel Cathedral kneeling at the crypt of her ancestors. Her crown rests beside her slightly askew. She whispers names under her breath one's history forgot. She died young, but not before laying the foundation of a union that would last for centuries. Her sin to the church and court, perhaps none. To herself, maybe silence, and then a hush, a true hush, one that sits in your bones. You're in Mecca, then Cairo, then Jerusalem. You are walking behind Shajar al-Dur, the Sultana of Egypt, born a slave, then a concubine, then a queen. Her path was unthinkable, unforgivable to many, but real. She ruled after her husband, the Sultan, died during the Seventh Crusade. She kept it secret for days long enough to consolidate power, to issue orders in his name, long enough to bring the army home and deliver victory. Only then did she reveal his death. They say she forged coins with her own image, a scandal in itself. And when she married the new sultan and later had him killed for betraying her, her enemies finally struck back. She was beaten to death with wooden slippers in a bathhouse, her body dumped into a moat. You stand now at the edge of that water, unsure if the ripples you see are wind or something else. Her reign was short, her impact vast, and her sin refusing to be invisible. And still your journey continues. These queens aren't fading. They're growing sharper, their sins louder. And you're not dreaming yet. Not quite. You drift forward, the scent of jasmine still lingering from Cairo's gardens, though it now mixes with something muskier, damp stone old vellum melting wax. You're entering the Iberian Peninsula again. Castile, Leon, Aragon. The kingdoms shift around you like puzzle pieces, and at the center of it all, you find Queen Urraca of Leon and Castile. She ruled in the 12th century, and though time has weathered her name, the echo of her reign hasn't dulled. Urraca was widowed young, then married again for alliance, not love. But her second husband, Alfonso I of Aragon, turned quickly from partner to rival. The marriage crumbled under betrayal, war, and politics. And Urraca, she didn't submit. She fought, literally. She led armies against him. They met on battlefields and in courtrooms, exchanging swords and subpoenas with equal force. You watch now as she examines a map lit only by firelight. Her fingers trace the border between her kingdom and her husband's forces. Her advisors murmur in Latin and Arabic, arguing treaties, taxes, bloodlines. Outside, snow is beginning to fall on armor and hooves. You see soldiers sharpening blades. One looks up, his eyes are afraid. Not of the enemy, of her. Her sin refusing to be controlled, refusing to be quiet. Even now the chroniclers hedge their words. Too strong, too ambitious, too female. You move on. And now Venice. The canals are quiet at this hour. You can hear every drip of water against stone as you glide through the twilight of the 15th century. There is no reigning queen here. Venice had no monarchy, no crown passed from father to child. But there were dogaressas, the wives of the doges, and one in particular draws you in. Dogaressa Giovanna Dandolo. She lived during the Renaissance when power was cloaked in art and masked behind masquerades. Giovanna was not a queen in name, but her influence reached deep into the heart of the Venetian Republic. She patronized artists, funded scholars, and most dangerously whispered her opinions on war and diplomacy to her husband behind closed doors. And he listened. That was the sin. The counselors didn't like her. The patriarchs scowled when her name came up. But they couldn't accuse her of anything. Not openly. So they invented sins instead. Accusations of vanity, lust, intrigue. The usual lines scribbled onto any woman who spoke too well. You're in her private quarters now, seated by a window overlooking the Grand Canal. She's writing notes to an artist, perhaps, or a poem half-dressed in code. She doesn't look up. You suspect she knows you're there, but doesn't need to acknowledge you. A queen in spirit, if not in law. From Venice, the candle of memory flickers, and you're drawn next to Hungary again. This time to Elizabeth of Hungary, not the saint, but the queen consort of Charles I. She's different, softer at first, but she lived through murder. Her husband was assassinated, his throat cut during Mass, and Elizabeth widowed and enraged. took their son Ladislaus the Posthumous and fled into the night. She did not cower. She gathered allies, fought off rivals, secured her son's inheritance with deals inked in candlelight. And if rumors are true, she ordered deaths in return. You're with her now in a mountain fortress. Snow piled high against the windows. Her hands are calloused from riding, her eyes tired from reading legal scrolls. She's no longer the soft girl who married a king. She is the architect of vengeance. Her sin was refusing to grieve in the expected way, not with tears, but with power. Now the fire dims again, and you find yourself walking along the banks of the Seine. Paris is quiet tonight. Bells toll softly over bridges. You slip into the shadow of another queen, Queen Blanche of Castile. She ruled as regent for her son Louis IX, the future Saint Louis. But sainthood was not born of innocence. It was raised by steel and sharpness. Blanche held the throne during his youth, and while the church praises her piety, her enemies feared her intelligence more than any army. You're in her chamber now, watching as she seals a scroll with the royal fleur-de-lis. There are names on that list, noble families who dared question her rule. Some will lose land. Others will lose heads. Outside, friars chant. Inside, Blanche sharpens her influence with each syllable of court Latin. She held her son's kingdom together with sheer force of will. Her sin, perhaps none, or perhaps too much strength. History doesn't always agree which is worse. You linger by the coals burning in the hearth. She whispers a prayer, but not to a god, to a legacy. You turn away and find yourself in Persia. The domes curve above you like waves blue and endless, and beneath them walks a woman few remember, but whose shadow still lingers, Tajlu Khanum. She was a queen consort of Shah Ismail Vurs, a founder of the Safavid dynasty. A Turkmen princess married into empire, she maneuvered through courts of scholars and warriors. She advised her husband subtly, discreetly, sometimes through poetry, sometimes through spies. You're in her private garden where pomegranate trees bend under their own weight. Her ladies whisper secrets beneath embroidered veils, but Tajlu listens more than she speaks. They say she helped shape her son's mind. They say her quiet resistance to certain clerics set policy for decades. But the chronicles bound in gold say little. Her sin wasn't what she did. It was how well she hid it. You sit in her pavilion now. Incense curls into the air, and her footsteps fade. Then suddenly you feel stone again underfoot. You're in Westminster, but not during daylight. This is midnight, and Queen Anne of Denmark walks ahead of you. She's the wife of James I of England, and behind her gentle face and Danish grace was a woman who knew the court better than most. Anne loved masks, ornate performances full of symbolism and veiled threats. Through them, she communicated alliances, displeasures, and ambitions. Without ever speaking openly, she sent messages more dangerous than a sword. You're in the banqueting house now. Candles flicker behind painted backdrops. Dancers move in silence. And Anne, seated in the shadows, nods once. A gesture misunderstood by many, but not by those who mattered. Later, her son Charles will be king. Later, he'll be executed. But tonight, Anne still holds a quiet court. Still writes letters. Still knows which bishop is lying, which ambassador carries poison in his promises. Her sin, perhaps nothing more than understanding the game and playing it. You're growing tired now, but not finished. There are still doors unopened, names unspoken, and sins yet to surface. The banqueting house fades behind you, its velvet drapes dissolving into mist. Anne of Denmark's shadow grows long, then slips away entirely. You move now like breath itself, weightless, unseen, pulled onward by the gravity of untold truths. You're in Prague now. The Habsburgs loom tall, their portraits covering walls in every corridor. But it's Maria Theresa who commands your attention. She ruled in the 18th century, the only female sovereign of the Habsburg Empire. A queen and an empress, yes, but also a mother of 16, a moralist, and to some a tyrant in brocade. Her sins weren't wrapped in scandal. They were sewn into law. She waged war, raised taxes, tightened censorship. She banished Protestants, reinforced Catholic dominance, and orchestrated marriages for political gain with surgical detachment. She signed death warrants with a quiet hand. You walk with her through Schönbrunn Palace, where the ceilings stretch like the sky, and every echo feels deliberate. She is pacing beside you, dressed in mourning black, despite the sunlight. Her daughter, Marie Antoinette, is still young, still innocent, but already being groomed for sacrifice. Maria Theresa loved her children. That's not in doubt. But she loved her empire more. Her greatest sin, convincing herself the two were the same. Now the palace slips away, and you feel the cold grit of northern wind across your skin. You're in Denmark again, but centuries earlier. Queen Dagmar, the beloved consort of King Valdemar II, is remembered as kind, gentle, almost saintly. But there's always a wrinkle in the weave of remembered perfection. Before Dagmar died, she allegedly begged her husband not to marry Berengaria of Portugal. And yet he did. And the court would turn against Berengaria, blaming her for raising taxes, for being foreign, for lacking Dagmar's gentle grace. But some whispered Dagmar was no saint either, that she sowed jealousy in her final days, that she engineered the narrative of her own sainthood by poisoning the court's memory against her successor before she ever wore the crown. You find Dagmar in a chapel now, her eyes closed in soft prayer, but her lips curled just slightly. Sometimes the most lasting sin is the one that rewrites how history sees you. You step outside and find yourself in the shadows of Moscow once more. Catherine of Russia, wife to Peter the Great, stands in the frost-bitten garden of the Winter Palace. She rose from nothing, some say a laundress, others a servant, to become empress. How charm, wit, and an uncanny ability to survive. Catherine's greatest scandal came not from her humble beginnings, but from the rumors that swirled during her rise. That she had many lovers before Peter. That she used secrets whispered at the right time to maneuver her way into the highest court in Europe. Peter loved her. Fiercely. Enough to name her empress before his death. But power once tasted changes the soul. You watch as she reviews letters in the bitter cold. A general's name is circled. A bishop's crossed out. Her fingers are bare, but her grip is firm. She ruled briefly after Peter's death. But in those months, she did not flinch. And when she died, there were no monuments. Just silence. As though history didn't quite know what to make of her. Now you descend into the steppes of Central Asia. The Kazakh queen Tomyris rises from a different time, an ancient queen whose reign is half history, half legend. Her story is blood-soaked and sky-bound. They say Cyrus the Great of Persia invaded her lands, that he offered marriage as deception, that she saw through it, that when Cyrus captured her son, she waged war in return, one so brutal and unrelenting that she eventually defeated and beheaded the emperor himself. Then, in one final act of vengeance, she soaked his severed head in a skin of blood, saying, "Drink your fill." You don't see her in a palace. You see her on horseback, sword drawn, wind tearing through her braids. A sin to those who value empire and conquest above justice, yes. But to her people she was legend made flesh, and then a different world. You're back in England, early 17th century, the court of James I once again. But now it's Arbella Stuart who commands your gaze. She was never crowned, but she was born into dangerous proximity to the throne, granddaughter of Margaret Douglas, great-granddaughter of Henry VII. Her life was a web of suspicion, watched by spies controlled by letters. She was a pawn, until she married in secret. To William Seymour, another royal bloodline. Together, they posed a threat. Together, they were imprisoned. Arbella was sent to the Tower, alone. She stopped eating. Some say she starved herself. Others say the death was more sinister. A quiet poison, a smothering. You're in her cell now. Cold stone. Scratched names on the walls. A single feather lies on the floor, quill or bird you can't tell. Her sin to love without permission, to marry without a crown's blessing. You step back and time unravels again. You are standing in Burgundy. Margaret of York is preparing to receive visitors. She is widow to Charles the Bold, sister to Edward IV of England. Her court is elegant, precise, and her eyes are always watching. She hosted pretenders to the English throne, supported rebellions, dabbled in diplomacy with a sharp tongue and a golden pen. You walk past the door where she once met with Perkin Warbeck, a man claiming to be a lost prince of England. She supported him. Some say she believed in him. Others say she simply wanted to watch Henry VII squirm. You see her seated at a writing desk now, parchment unfurling like a battle map. Her letters could rattle alliances. Her smile could deflect suspicion, and her silence sharper than any blade. You turn just as the candles gutter out behind you. You're not done yet. The sins of these women, some whispered, some carved into stone, still rise like smoke. And your path is still ahead, still winding, still shadowed. The ink on Margaret's parchment is still wet in your mind as the air turns once more damp and carrying the scent of old vellum horsehair and dried rose petals. You leave Burgundy behind and step into Brittany. The coastline howls outside, and within the castle walls walks Anne of Brittany, the last sovereign duchess of her realm. She married two kings of France, first Charles VIII, then Louis XII. Neither marriage was her choice. Both were arranged to absorb her duchy into the crown. But Anne was no passive prize. She refused to speak French in court, insisted on Breton being taught to her children. She negotiated the terms of her own dowry with the precision of a merchant prince. And behind the soft-spoken piety there was steel. You walk beside her now through a long gallery painted with maritime scenes, ships, ports, fleets. Her eyes flick across them, not with sentiment, but with calculation. France wanted her obedience. Anne gave them children instead, then made sure they were raised with loyalty to Brittany. Her sin was subtle resistance wrapped in motherhood, cloaked in mourning gowns, but resistance nonetheless. Now you pass through a narrow door and find yourself stepping into Scotland once again. A century older now, a palace colder, a queen less known. You're in the presence of Joan Beaufort, Queen of Scots' widow to James I. She became regent after his assassination, her husband stabbed to death by nobles he tried to tame. They had come for him in the night, and legend says she tried to shield him with her body. The blade cut through both. She survived. He did not. You find her years later sitting with the weight of regency pressing against her collarbone. The nobles eye her warily. She marries again, perhaps for security, perhaps for love. But her new husband is hated, seen as a social climber, a greedy, grasping man who leverages her favor for personal gain. Soon, her enemies rise. There's a coup. She's arrested, imprisoned in a castle, her children taken. Some say she was poisoned there. Others say she died quietly, a queen reduced to a prisoner, her voice unheard. You sit with her in the dim cell. She's writing a letter she knows will never be delivered. Her fingers tremble, but the words are firm. Her sin, misplaced trust. And still the tide rolls on. Next, you walk beneath high arches adorned with mosaics and dust. Byzantium again. But this time your path winds toward Irene of Athens. She wasn't merely consort. She was empress, and she wasn't content with that. When her husband died, Irene ruled as regent for her son Constantine VI. At first it was tolerated, encouraged even. But as the boy grew older, tensions swelled. She refused to give up power. Her rule became absolute. And when Constantine tried to depose her, she responded with stunning brutality. She had him blinded, not exiled, not imprisoned, blinded. In the very palace where he'd once played as a child. You're standing in the chamber where it happened now. It's quiet, sterile, a place for decisions, not tears. Later, Irene declared herself emperor, not empress, ruling in her own name. The first woman in Byzantine history to do so. And yet, her reign was short-lived. Her enemies circled. She died in exile, forgotten. But you remember, and the stones remember. You walk onward, and the golden light of the east gives way to gray northern skies again. Now you're in the Holy Roman Empire. Aachen, the court of Empress Matilda, daughter of Henry I of England, widow of the German emperor, and the woman who would one day be the nearly Queen of England. Her father made all his nobles swear loyalty to her, but when he died, they broke that vow. The crown went to her cousin Stephen. A civil war followed. Years of unrest, battles, betrayals, blood. You sit beside her now at a campaign table. Her armor lies beside her dented, polished worn. Her hair is tucked under a simple veil. She reads dispatches by firelight, her expression unreadable. She once walked into Westminster, declared herself queen, and then just days later was chased out by a mob. They said she was arrogant, unwomanly, too proud. They never said the same about the men who claimed thrones. Her sin daring to act like a king. You feel her eyes pass through you as you stand. She doesn't ask for sympathy, just memory. Now the cold grows sharper. You cross into Scandinavia once more, and Norway opens before you. It is the year 1388, and Margaret Thurs is still on the throne, still ruling in the name of a dead child. But you've already met her. Now you meet her political daughter, Queen Philippa of England, married to Eric of Pomerania. Philippa was raised in power, taught to read treaties as easily as prayers. She became regent while her husband traveled, and when enemies attacked, she led the defense herself. Literally. She stood on the battlements during the siege of Copenhagen, directed cannons, bolstered morale, held the line. And she won. You're on those same battlements now. The stones under your feet are slick with sea spray. The torchlight casts her shadow twice her size. They expected a wife. She became a commander, her sin to some overshadowing her husband. History quietly pushed her aside. But the walls remember her voice. You descend now into warmer lands. South to Navarre. Queen Blanche. I stands beneath olive trees listening to her advisors argue about succession. She inherited a kingdom, but her husband, John II of Aragon, refused to relinquish control even after her death. Yes, after her death. He claimed her title as his own, refused to crown their son. Ruled as though Blanche had never existed. But while she lived, Blanche governed wisely, issued charters, brokered peace, maintained prosperity, and yet in death she was erased. You visit her tomb. It's modest, too modest for a queen. A reminder the deepest sin a queen can commit is to be powerful enough to be forgotten by design. You bow your head and leave. Now the ground beneath you changes. You feel dust, dry heat, distant hoofbeats, and ahead another queen waits in silence, her face hidden, her name half lost, but her story still written in shadow. The dust thickens as you move forward, warm against your skin. This land feels ancient, older than kingdoms, older than script. You are in North Africa now, in the great imperial court of the Almohad Caliphate. And here behind a curtain of carved cedar and white linen, you meet Queen Zainab an-Nafsawiya. Her name may be unfamiliar, but her legend is not. Zainab was the consort of Yusuf ibn Tashfin, the founder of Marrakesh and one of the most powerful rulers of his age. She came from wealth, perhaps even royalty, and was known for her intelligence diplomacy, and more whispered than spoken, her influence behind the throne. You sit with her now in a sun-drenched room thick with the scent of orange blossoms and ink. She's drafting letters dictating policy, arranging marriages that will sway alliances across deserts and seas. Yusuf listens to her in public. That's how obvious her authority became. Some said she was a sorceress, others a political genius. But all agreed without her, there would have been no empire. Her sin power in plain sight. You turn now, and the heat gives way to stone again. The air is cooler, damp. You're in Brittany once more. But this time the castle belongs to Constance, Duchess of Brittany. Born into conflict, raised amid rebellion, and married into captivity. She was forced to wed Geoffrey, son of Henry II of England, and then, after his sudden death, held against her will to prevent her from ruling independently. She was a duchess, a mother, a hostage, and still she fought. You walk with her along a narrow corridor, dimly lit by torchlight. She cradles her son Arthur, future Duke of Brittany, future prisoner, future murder victim at the hands of his English uncle, King John. Constance knew. She saw the danger coming, tried to shield him, tried to rally support. But it wasn't enough. Still, she never stopped pushing, never stopped speaking. Even when the English crown tried to silence her with exile threats, marriage contracts, and eventually illness. Her sin being a mother with a voice louder than the king's. You watch her disappear into the mist, and then the world brightens again. Not by light, but by color. You are in the Mughal Empire now. The gardens bloom in impossible symmetry, roses, jasmines, lilies blooming in sun and shadow. And standing in their heart is Empress Nur Jahan, the light of the world, wife of Emperor Jahangir. A queen not merely in name but in deed. She issued coins with her name, held court, rode elephants, led armies. She hunted tigers and wrote poetry. She built tombs and shaped policy. You walk with her through a courtyard lined with red sandstone, each step ringing faintly beneath your feet. Her robes shimmer like water. Her husband, addicted to wine and opium, relied on her fully. She signed royal decrees, ruled in his name. And when he died, the nobles moved quickly to erase her. They couldn't kill her, but they silenced her, forced her into retirement, let her fade, her sin being the emperor while married to one, and she wore that crown more gracefully than many born to it. Now you step away, further east. You find yourself in Korea, the Joseon dynasty, a palace of balance and brutal formality. Here walks Queen Munjong, a devout Buddhist in a Confucian court, a woman underestimated by her peers. After the death of her husband, King Jeongjong, she became regent for her young son. And that's when things changed. She exiled her enemies, many of them Confucian scholars, appointed her own people to powerful posts, consolidated power, whispered orders in the language of temple bells and silk fans. They called her ruthless, cunning. But the country thrived. You watch her kneel before a small altar, her hands pressed in prayer, but her eyes are open, watching, calculating. Her sin was rule by faith and by fear. The shadows stretch again and the wind cools. Now you're in Wales, before conquest, before erasure. You find yourself walking beside Eleanor de Montfort. She wasn't born a queen, but became one by marriage wed to Llywelyn ap Gruffudd, the last true Prince of Wales. She was niece to Henry III of England, a political bride. But she chose her side, and it wasn't England. She smuggled letters, convinced lords to resist. Her very presence was a threat. You find her riding through misty hills, cloak drawn tight. She's delivering messages to rally Welsh unity, speaking with lords who still believe freedom might last. And then she vanishes, captured, imprisoned by Edward I. She died in childbirth shortly after. Her daughter was taken, raised by nuns. Her husband would be hunted, his head sent to London Bridge. But Eleanor, she left a mark. Her sin crawling a kingdom England needed to destroy. You move on now quietly and step into Egypt once again. You are at the Mamluk court, and ahead of you stands Shajar al-Dur, but not in her moment of triumph this time. No, now it's the end. You've seen her rise. Now you see her fall. The men she ruled beside turned on her. They said she ruled too long, that her decisions endangered their order, that she was too powerful, too direct, too proud. She's in the bathhouse again. The room is warm, fogged with scented steam, but the slipper wooden sharp waits just beyond. You know what's coming. She does too. But she doesn't run. Her sin refusing to fade. And now you move north again, into Germany. You are walking behind Elizabeth of Bavaria, Empress of Austria, Queen of Hungary. Sisi once more. You've seen her already, touched her grief. But now you feel her final steps. She will die by assassination. A sharpened file slipped into her heart by a man who didn't know her, only her title. She didn't cry out. She apologized for keeping her attendants waiting. You see her now walking a lakeside path, gloved, veiled, still mourning, always mourning. Her sins, beauty, sadness, refusal to conform, and the world punished her for all three. You pause. The stories are beginning to blur, but they're not finished. Ahead, a staircase, not down, but deeper still. You descend carefully, your hand tracing the wall, smooth stone, worn soft by centuries of passing lives. The air cools not with cold, but with stillness. Below you, the light bends and the hush deepens. You arrive now in Castile in the 15th century, and before you walks Queen Isabella the Rush, the one the world calls La Católica, the queen of the Reconquista, the woman whose ships, whose gold, whose will helped set an empire spinning across oceans. She is remembered with reverence by some, with unease by others. But you are here now, in the shadow of her rule, where the banners are clean but the soil beneath is not. She walks barefoot across the chapel floor, beads clicking in her hands. She prays not for mercy, for victory. Her sin-unquestioning faith weaponized into policy. Isabella signed the Alhambra Decree, the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. Hundreds of thousands exiled, converted, killed. A kingdom purified by fire and fear. Later she would approve the Inquisition. Later still, she would send ships west, chasing maps drawn in guesses and greed. You follow her into her private chamber, and she kneels before a crucifix. She believes, with full conviction, and that perhaps is the most dangerous sin of all. You step back, and the air shifts. The scent of parchment and powdered wigs replaces incense. You're in France now, in the court of Louis XVI. Versailles gleams around you, mirrors and chandeliers, silks and powdered masks. And at the center of it all, Marie Antoinette. Her story is well worn, but here it's quieter, less dramatic, more human. You find her not at a ball, not in scandal, but at her writing desk. A letter lies half-written. A tear stains the ink. You walk past a tower of gift boxes, ribbons unopened, symbols of a life gilded beyond comprehension. But beneath the gold, there's a girl who never asked to be queen. And yet, her sins were baked into the palace walls. Extravagance, indifference, the let-them-eat-cake myth never spoken by her mouth, but etched into her legend. She tried to reform late, supported the king's timid gestures toward constitutional monarchy. But it was too late. You hear the chants outside the palace gates. The revolution is no longer coming. It's here. You step away as the guards close in. The queen does not resist. She lowers her head and walks. But her silence echoes louder than her voice ever did. Now the air grows damp, a different kind of cold. England again. The Tower, and within it, Lady Jane Grey. She was queen for 9 days, crowned against her will, a pawn in a plot spun by men with more ambition than wisdom. You find her in a narrow room, sunlight cutting across the floor in thin gold ribbons. She's reading, a Bible, her lips moving in silent study. Jane was a scholar, not a ruler, a girl who loved Greek and Latin, who never asked for a throne. They forced it on her. And when Mary Tudor came to claim her crown, Jane didn't fight, but they still executed her. You walk with her now to the scaffold. She does not cry. She stumbles briefly, searching for the block. Her final words, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." Her sin, obedience. And yet it cost her everything. Now the stone turns red underfoot, and you step through centuries into Scotland again. A queen not of royal blood, but of royal outcome. Agnes Randolph Black. Agnes, Countess of Dunbar. During the siege of her castle by English forces, she stood on the battlements in velvet gowns, dusting the damage with a lace handkerchief. She mocked the attackers, shouted insults from the walls, rebuffed every effort to breach her defenses. They called her proud, dangerous, unladylike. But the castle never fell, her sin mocking men who thought her weak, and winning. You see her now laughing in the wind, the hem of her dress black with soot. She waves to the retreating army and turns without fear. Now to Italy. You pass through shadowed vineyards into the 16th century Duchy of Mantua. Isabella d'Este walks beside you. She was not just a queen, but a force, patron of Da Vinci, Titian, Raphael. Her letters crossed Europe like threads in a spider's web. Her court shimmered with culture. But there were other whispers, that she kept apothecaries close, that she traded favors for secrets, that she intercepted correspondence and blackmailed enemies, that her library held not just scrolls, but spells. You find her in her studiolo, a private room lined with cabinets. She opens one and removes a small silver box. Inside, powdered ambergris, a love potion, or something more. Her sin knowledge, too much of it, and the wisdom to use it. You follow her into shadow, and rise again into Germany, into the path of Empress Adelaide. A saint, eventually, but not in her lifetime. She was widowed young, imprisoned by a rival king, escaped remarried this time to Otto, the great Holy Roman Emperor. But she never forgot. She ruled the empire when he traveled, advised him in council, raised her grandchildren after her son's death, and when her daughter-in-law tried to steal power, Adelaide returned to court, ousted her, and restored order. Her sin enduring too long, knowing too much, refusing to die quietly. You find her in a chapel, whispering prayers into stone. But behind her, a map, the empire, still held in her mind like a rosary. Now the wind thickens again, and the sky above you feels heavier. You are in England once more, with Eleanor of Provence, queen to Henry III. She was hated by the Londoners for her foreign ways, for her family's greed, for her quiet influence over the weak-willed king. Once, as she traveled by boat along the Thames, the people stoned her barge. She survived and never forgave. She arranged her son's marriage to Eleanor of Castile, strengthened royal alliances, raised the future Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots, and when Henry died, she became a nun. But not before rewriting the rules. You're in her cell now. No jewels, no throne, just ink and parchment and memory. The final words of a queen who played a longer game than most. The room fades. The candle burns lower. And you're still not at the end, but almost. The cell where Eleanor of Provence once wrote her last letters fades into cool stone and a hush that feels eternal. Your steps no longer echo. The stillness absorbs every movement, as though the walls have learned to keep secrets too. And now you are in Aragon again, but further back, standing beside Queen Petronilla. She was crowned at just 1 year old and married off at the age of 13 to Ramon Berenguer IV, the Count of Barcelona. The marriage united Aragon and Catalonia, forming a political force that would shape Iberian history. But Petronilla was more than a symbolic bride. She signed treaties, managed lands, and when her husband died, she took back her crown and ruled as queen regnant, quietly, deliberately. You find her now in a hall of tapestries, the air laced with lavender and burnt oil. Her advisors shuffle scrolls. Petronilla signs each one without hesitation. She abdicates in favor of her son eventually, but on her terms. Her sin taking the power she was born with and keeping it longer than expected. You blink slowly and the scene shifts. You're in Bohemia. Prague's spires pierce a gray sky and the Vltava River hums beneath the bridges. Here Queen Elizabeth of Bohemia, the Winter Queen, holds court. She was daughter to James I of England, sister to Charles I, and married to Frederick V, Elector Palatine. When he accepted the crown of Bohemia, he held it for only 1 season, 1 winter, and then he lost everything. Elizabeth, however, never surrendered her dignity. You find her in exile, surrounded by children, letters, portraits. She is writing again, always writing. Pleas for support, requests for recognition, subtle shifts in allegiances. History called her the Queen of the Winter. But you see her now, not cold, but resolute. Her sin enduring disgrace with elegance, living long enough to see her children reclaim what was lost. You rise from her chamber and descend into yet another, France again. But now in the reign of Louis XIV. And seated at the edge of his golden court is Françoise d'Aubigné, better known as Madame de Maintenon. She was not born royal, not even noble, but she became the king's mistress, and later secretly his wife. She never wore a crown, yet held the ear of the most powerful monarch in Europe. Her influence was vast. She encouraged piety, reigned in courtly decadence, and shaped policy from behind closed doors. The Sun King adored her quiet strength. You find her now in her chapel at Saint-Cyr, a school she founded for noble girls. She lights a candle, not for prayer, for remembrance. Her sin wielding the power of a queen without ever being one, and never letting anyone forget it. Now further north, Sweden, Queen Ulrika Eleonora the Younger. Her story is one of abdication, but also assertion. She ruled in the early 18th century after her brother Charles XII died without an heir. She seized the moment, proclaimed herself queen, and tried to hold the crumbling weight of the Swedish Empire together. But the nobles resisted. She was forced to relinquish much of her power to the parliament. She eventually abdicated in favor of her husband, but not before leaving her mark reforms, diplomacy, and a legacy of resistance. You see her now walking a windswept courtyard, her fur-lined cloak heavy with snow. She glances up at the sky as if waiting for it to change. It won't, but she will act anyway. Her sin, believing she could bend the will of men with dignity alone. You step into the warmth again, this time in Navarre. And there in the court of the 16th century walks Queen Jeanne d'Albret. She was mother to Henry IV of France and queen regnant in her own right. But what set Jeanne apart was her fierce support of Calvinism. She openly defied Catholic France, hosted Protestant thinkers, refused to convert even when pressured by Catherine de' Medici herself. You find her now in a small chapel reading from a French translation of the scriptures. Her brow is furrowed, but not in fear. They tried to lure her with titles, threaten her with war, bribe her with marriage contracts. She refused, and raised a son who would become the first Bourbon king of France. Her sin, faith without compromise, and influence that lasted far beyond her death. Now the air stills again, and you find yourself in Scotland once more, before the world knew kings or queens. Here the name is not royal, but mythic. Scathash, a warrior woman, a teacher, a queen of shadow. She trained heroes in battle, in strategy, in survival. Her fortress on the Isle of Skye was said to be unreachable, wrapped in fog and guarded by beasts. But you are there now. The cliffs rise around you. The wind tears at your cloak. And from the mist she emerges tall, cloaked in iron and darkness. Her pupils became legends. Her name became a whisper. Was she real? History can't agree. But legend says she ruled alone, without consort, without heir, her sin being strong enough to live in memory longer than truth. Now to the east again, into Poland. You are walking beside Bona Sforza, Italian, by birth, Polish queen by marriage. She brought Renaissance art architecture and learning to the court. But she also brought ambition, schemes, intrigue. She arranged marriages that shocked the nobility. She hoarded wealth, planted allies in every corner of the kingdom. They feared her, respected her, hated her. When her son Sigismund II, Augustus, married against her wishes, she left Poland. And later she was poisoned in Italy by those who wanted her lands, her gold, her silence. You sit beside her now as she sips wine, unaware of the bitterness beneath it. Her sin trying to stay sovereign in a world that saw her only as foreign. You rise again, slowly. A final chamber opens before you, and within it another woman stands, quiet, uncrowned, but not powerless. The chamber is warm, but quiet velvet curtains drawn the air still, as breath held in a crowd. You step forward, and the woman within turns. This is Eleanor of Aquitaine again, but not as the queen you met in an earlier corridor. This is her older now, widowed twice, imprisoned, then free. She's been queen of both France and England, and now she's more powerful than either crown. You find her in Fontevraud Abbey, cloaked in simple wool. Her eyes, however, burn brighter than the torches. She negotiated treaties in multiple languages, fought wars through her sons, commissioned art, song, architecture, imprisoned by Henry II for backing her sons in rebellion, released by her favorite Richard the Lionheart when he claimed the throne. And when he went on crusade, she ruled in his place. She's nearly 80 now, but her mind is sharp. She reads Latin, dictates letters, and speaks with popes. Her hands are wrinkled, her voice unshaken, her sin outlasting the world that tried to silence her. You step past her, careful not to break the weight of her gaze, and find yourself in the Highlands. A new queen waits Margaret Tudor, sister to Henry VIII, married to James IV of Scotland, mother to James V, grandmother to Mary Queen of Scots, great-grandmother to James VI and I of England and Scotland. Her blood runs in every vein of every royal to come. But it's not her genealogy that keeps you here. It's her ambition. Widowed young, she tried to rule as regent for her son. But the Scottish lords turned against her. She remarried foolishly. A Douglas. Political disaster. She was betrayed. Fled Edinburgh disguised as a man. Lost her sons. Lost her fortune. And yet, she never stopped writing. Never stopped maneuvering. She was the spider at the center of the web long after they thought her dead weight. You see her now at a desk near a fire. She's aged, yes, but her fingers still grip the quill like a dagger. Her sin acting like a king in a kingdom that never let her forget she wasn't. Now you descend into silence again and emerge in Ethiopia. Aksum. You are standing before Queen Gudit Yodit in the local tongue, a woman shrouded in as much legend as fact. The story goes that she led a rebellion that toppled the Aksumite Empire, burned churches, dethroned kings, ruled for 40 years. Her name became a whisper of fire. You find her now on a battlefield shrouded in smoke. Her blade drips. Her crown is dented. Her eyes unblinking. Was she a liberator, a conqueror, a symbol of vengeance? The monks called her evil, but the people called her queen. Her sin destroying a kingdom to build her own. You leave the battlefield and pass through a curtain of wind. Now another shadow joins you. You are in Ireland again, standing beside Aoife McMurrough. Her father, the King of Leinster, married her off to a Norman noble, Richard de Clare. Strongbow. The price, an army. Her dowry, a kingdom. That union opened the door to centuries of English rule in Ireland. Some say she betrayed her people. Others say she did what she must. You find her now on a high cliff watching the sea. The wind batters her cloak, but she stands unmoving. Her face is unreadable. Not ashamed, not proud, just waiting. Her sin becoming the hinge upon which two histories turned. And now your footsteps take you across the sea once more. To France. But not the bright salons of Versailles. No, this is the bloody courtyard of the French wars of religion. And here walks Catherine de Bourbon's sister to Henry IV, a Protestant noblewoman in a court of shifting allegiances. Her brother demanded she marry a Catholic duke to secure peace. She refused. For years. Negotiations dragged. Threats made. Promises offered. She finally relented, but under conditions that shocked the court. She refused to convert, refused to bear children. Her marriage was political, but her resistance personal. You sit beside her now in a cold chapel. She fingers her rosary, but it's empty, symbolic. Her prayers are her own. Her sin drawing a line and refusing to move it. The candles gutter, and you move south, to Naples. The streets are tight, the air ripe with oil, citrus, and rot. And in the heart of it all stands Joanna II of Naples. She came to the throne late, already steeped in scandal. She took lovers openly, murdered rivals quietly, changed heirs like gloves. Some said she ran a court of debauchery. Others claimed she was poisoned more than once but always survived. You find her in a dark room with stained glass, the colors bleeding over her silken gown. She's speaking to an assassin. The man bows leaves, and she pours herself wine. She ruled for 30 years, her sin daring to enjoy power and pleasure in equal measure, and never once apologizing. Now to the Balkans. You stand in the ruins of a court, now forgotten by most. Queen Helen of Anjou, a Catholic queen ruling over Orthodox lands. A woman who built monasteries, opened schools, and united divided realms. She walked a religious tightrope with grace. But when politics turned, her faith was called into question. She protected her children, shielded her people, and quietly stepped back when it was time. You sit in a stone courtyard where she once handed out bread to the poor, her robes dusted with flour, her crown worn underneath a plain veil, her sin faith that didn't fit into neat categories, and compassion the chroniclers didn't know how to write. You stand, exhale. You've walked far, and there are still voices ahead. But the light is changing now. It's softer. The sins are whispering now, and you are almost ready to rest. You step forward, and the light flickers like a dying candle. The marble grows colder underfoot. The names spoken here are softer, almost forgotten. But not yet. Now you find yourself in the kingdom of Georgia. The 12th century. Queen Tamar stands before you, tall and veiled, her eyes steady beneath a golden circlet. She was crowned king rather than queen, her father's decision. And when he died, she reigned alone. Not quietly, not passively, but as a warrior and a judge, a patron of poetry, a commander of armies. She faced rebellion early, led by nobles who scoffed at her crown. She crushed them without bloodlust, just purpose. You see her now on horseback, robes flowing behind her like a banner. The people cheered her not because she demanded it, but because she earned it. She led Georgia into its golden age. Her sin, none that history admits, but perhaps it's that she succeeded too fully. That no one could forget her and few could match her. Now the mountain winds carry you east again and down into Armenia. Queen Zabel of Armenia sits beneath a carved dome, sunlight breaking through alabaster windows. She was queen in name from childhood, married off to claimants, shuffled like a coin in a kingdom of ambition. She ruled through uncertainty, saw her husbands crowned then fall. When one rebelled against her will, she stepped aside. But not before safeguarding her daughter's place on the throne. She made peace not through battle, but survival. You kneel beside her in an orchard, where apricots bloom, and she hums softly, half lullaby, half prayer. Her sin yielding when the world demanded drama. History barely mentions her, but the fruit trees still grow. Now you walk through the eastern sands again, the court of the Seljuk Turks. And here stands Turkan Khatun, wife of Sultan Malik Shah. She was not just consort, she was regent, power broker, empire mother. She issued orders in the Sultan's name, negotiated with viziers, and played politics with scholars and spies. She fought fiercely for her son's right to rule, and when he died, she still tried to hold the court together against men who despised her power. You see her now seated on a carpet strewn with scrolls. Her hands tremble, not from age but from rage barely contained. The caliph refuses to recognize her regency. The court whispers, but she continues, her sin governing like an emperor, not a widow. And in the end, they stripped her of everything. She died in silence. But you remember. Now northward, Hungary. Queen Elizabeth of Poland, wife of Charles I of Hungary. Not the other Elizabeth you've seen. This one ruled through mediation and pressure. Soft hands behind iron moves. She arranged alliances with papal favor, pacified restless lords, ensured the succession of her son. She gave alms in the morning, approved assassinations in the evening. You find her in a market square now, speaking softly to a bishop. Nearby, a man is hanged for treason, his papers still folded in his coat. She walks away before the body drops. Her sin balance, the kind that frightens those who prefer clarity. She never smiled much, but the kingdom endured. Now a new name. The Canary Islands. Queen Teguise of Lanzarote, the daughter of the island's last free king before the Spanish conquest. Her name is legend now, carried in winds and murals. The woman who warned her people of the conquistadors, who resisted where she could, who chose surrender not out of weakness, but to prevent bloodshed. Her story is fractured, told in song, not script. But you see her now standing on a basalt cliff, her eyes on the sails. She does not cry. She sings, her sin to the invaders' defiance, to her people protection misunderstood by time. You step away, the sea salt heavy on your skin, and then Persia again. Queen Purandokht. She ruled the Sassanid Empire in the 7th century, following chaos, bloodshed, and the collapse of lines. Her court was surrounded by civil war, and yet she re-established justice, reinstated taxes, restored order. She believed power could be reclaimed with law, not fear. You see her now, under a moonlit archway, writing by oil lamp. She signs decrees with hands that shake not from doubt, but fatigue. Her reign was brief. Her name barely remembered in the chronicles. But she tried. Her sin, believing peace could be built in the space where empires crumbled. You leave her beneath the stars and arrive in Brittany again. Queen Ermengarde of Anjou, wife to Alan Fergant, mother of Conan III. She held power in quiet hands, walked halls where her name was seldom spoken, but her letters survive, and in them sharpness, strategy. She traded lands, settled disputes, carved stability from chaos. No one wrote songs about her, no statues, no scandals, but the region prospered. You sit beside her garden herbs, curled in early frost. She's grinding something in a mortar, a salve, a cure, or perhaps something else. Her sin existing between pages, not headlines, but you feel her just the same. Now as the shadows grow long, you are pulled far east into Japan, and standing in a palace veiled with rice paper and morning mist is Empress Jito. She reigned in the 7th century, widow to Emperor Tenmu. She took power after his death not as a placeholder, but as sovereign. She compiled the first imperial chronicles, reshaped the court, oversaw reforms. You sit with her in a lacquered chamber, the scent of cedar and ink heavy in the air. A servant bows low, leaving behind a tray of fresh calligraphy. She reads it, smiles slightly, then sets it alight. Not everything is meant to last. Her sin, knowing exactly which stories to erase. You rise again. The quiet is deeper now. You're not quite alone, but the voices ahead are few. Fewer still are speaking. The last queens are near. You step into silence now, so deep it feels like velvet pressed against your ears. The halls have narrowed, grown older, but the footsteps of queens still echo faintly, each one leading you gently toward the end. Now you are in Northumbria, early medieval England, a kingdom fractured. The land before unified crowns and Magna Cartas, And at the center you find Ethelfled, daughter of Alfred the Great, known as the Lady of the Mercians. She was never officially crowned queen, yet she ruled, commanded armies, negotiated with Vikings, rebuilt cities, protected her people. You find her riding beside her men into battle, not behind them. She raises a spear, her cloak caught in the wind. A standard, not a decoration. After her husband's death, she ruled alone. Her sin being a better ruler than many kings who followed. She died peacefully, quietly. But her legacy became shadowed by time. You walk from her grave now, hidden beneath moss and stone, and into the candlelit hush of another court. Portugal, Queen Maria I. The first woman to rule Portugal in her own right. They called her Maria the Pious, and for a time she was beloved. She rebuilt the kingdom after earthquake and war, strengthened colonies, stabilized the court. And then her mind began to slip. The deaths of her husband, her son, her confessor, too many losses too quickly. Her grief grew into visions, into outbursts, into silence. The court whispered that she'd gone mad, but she had not forgotten how to rule. Even in her decline, she insisted on routine, on order. You find her now in a dark chamber humming a hymn. Her crown lies untouched on the table beside her, her sin feeling too deeply and refusing to pretend otherwise. Now the path turns west again, to Castile, and in its flickering torchlight stands Berenguela of Castile. She was queen for only a few weeks, abdicating quickly in favor of her son Ferdinand III. But that was only part of the story. Berenguela did not vanish. She remained his closest advisor, his strategist, his co-ruler in everything but name. She arranged alliances, suppressed rebellions, outwitted nobles. You find her now in a private study. Her son sits across from her listening more than he speaks. She passes him a sealed letter, its contents known only to them. Later, he will become a saint. But her hands shaped that path. Her sin power in the background, invisible, indispensable. You turn again and the room cools. You're in Venice now, with Caterina Cornaro, a noblewoman turned Queen of Cyprus, married for diplomacy, installed for convenience. But she took her crown seriously. When the Republic of Venice demanded she abdicate so they could take the island for themselves, she resisted, briefly, proudly. Then she relented. She returned to Venice a queen in name only, but one with dignity intact. You see her now surrounded by art and poets ruling over a court in exile, her spirit unbroken. Her sin thinking a distant republic might value her sacrifice. But she remained royal even without a throne. Now the Adriatic wind carries you across the sea. You arrive in Serbia in the 14th century. Queen Helena of Serbia stands in a stone courtyard draped with ivy. She is dressed in simple black, a widow and a nun. But she once ruled as co-regent alongside her husband, Stefan Uroš Thurs. She educated her children, managed monasteries, led troops when needed. And when her husband died, she governed in her sons' names. You find her now writing quietly in a monastic scriptorium. She copies scripture with careful hands, but nearby her seal rests beside an open missive, a royal letter, still addressed to her. Her sin carrying power so gracefully, the world forgot she had ever wielded it. You stand now in stillness, and then Scandinavia once more. You are with Christina of Saxony, Queen Consort of Denmark. Her marriage to King John was political, her court rigid. But Christina found her strength in building, in prayer, in resilience. She was no commander, no rebel. But when her husband imprisoned her trusted advisor and seized her properties, she fled the court entirely, took refuge in a convent, and ruled there instead. You find her walking between cloisters now, each step measured. She pauses beside a fountain, not to pray, but to think, her sin turning her back on the crown, and never asking for it back. Now the sea breeze grows colder. You're in Normandy, with Matilda of Flanders, Queen Consort to William the Conqueror. They called her loyal, small in stature, but her shadow was long. She governed in William's absence, managed rebellions, funded churches, raised a court that would one day claim both England and France. They say William loved her more than any other, but even she defied him, once secretly supporting their rebellious son. You find her now sewing the Bayeux tapestry, not for art, for memory, for myth. She embroiders not truth, but legacy. Her sin knowing that memory matters more than fact. The tapestry is nearly complete, and so is your walk. You are near the end now. Only a few queens left to visit. Only a few more steps through this hall of whispers. The thread of time is thinning. Your steps are almost weightless now, echoing in silence that listens more than it speaks. And still one final corridor opens before you. You walk into England again. But now the year is 1558, and Elizabeth I is about to become queen. You don't meet her at her coronation, not in the glory of her golden years. You find her in a cold stone chamber, hunched over a letter, with a trembling hand, still half a prisoner in Mary Tudor's kingdom. She's survived the Tower, dodged charges of treason, seen her friends executed, her name whispered by bishops like a warning. She's not regal yet, but she's watchful, hardened, learning. You watch her press wax to the seal. Her fingers are stained with ink, her expression unreadable. Soon she will become the Virgin Queen. She will rule for 45 years. She will turn away every suitor wield words as weapons and wear white as both armor and veil. Her sin refusing to marry and daring to govern not like a woman, but like a legend. You step away. Now the candles flicker low. You find yourself in France, the court of Anne of Brittany again, but this time in the final years. You saw her as a young woman once guarding her duchy. Now you find her gray-haired grieving. She's buried more children than she can name without weeping. She's endured war, widowhood, and the slow death of independence for her homeland. And yet she still rules the court with precision, decides which artists live, which laws pass, which alliances survive. She takes your hand briefly, though she sees only air. Her sin of same two nations that demanded her loyalty but never gave it in return. Now you are in Spain again, with Joanna of Castile, Juana la Loca. You've heard the name, but now you see the woman. She was daughter of Isabella and Ferdinand, mother to Charles V, wife to Philip the Handsome, and victim of them all. Her husband cheated. Her father distrusted. Her son imprisoned her. She mourned. She resisted. And then she broke. But not fully. They called her mad, locked her in a convent for decades, but she kept speaking. You hear her now whispering to a portrait. Her fingers stroke the canvas, but her eyes see you. Her sin grief that didn't obey the rules of state, and love that refused to die when it was no longer useful. You don't look away. Now the light turns golden, and you're in Mongolia. The steppes stretch endlessly around you, and ahead stands Turagana Khatun, the widow of Ogedei Khan, mother of Guyuk. After her husband's death, she took control of the Mongol Empire, held it for 5 years. Unofficially, uneasily, unyieldingly. She appointed her own advisors, managed tribute, oversaw diplomacy. You see her now on horseback, her veil whipping in the wind. A council of men watches her approach. None dare speak first. Her sin commanding one of the largest empires on earth without ever being crowned. She passes by you silent and rides toward the horizon. You blink, and you're in Byzantium again, but now standing in the shadow of its fall. You walk beside Anna Notaras, daughter of the last Magus II Grand Admiral of Constantinople, a woman born to grandeur, thrown into exile by fire. She never reigned, but she never forgot. In exile, she funded churches, preserved manuscripts, protected refugees. She clung to the memory of a fallen empire with devotion sharper than steel. You find her in Venice writing to the Pope. Her words are cold, precise, political. She asks not for pity, but restitution. Her sin refusing to let the fall of her city be the fall of her people. You turn once more. Now a colder wind. Iceland. Queen Aud the deep-minded. She was a Norse matriarch widowed far from home. She gathered ships, crossed oceans, and settled in a strange land. She gave land to freedmen, held courts, declared laws. She was baptized late in life, one of the earliest Christian women in the region. You sit with her by a longhouse hearth. She offers you warmth without question. Her sin living too well for the saga to contain. She nods once and fades. The torchlight dims again. Now before you is Catherine Parr, 6th wife of Henry VIII. She survived him. That alone is a feat worth remembering. But Catherine was more than survivor. She was a scholar, a reformer, a published author. She nearly died for her beliefs, narrowly escaping arrest for her Protestant sympathies. You see her now in a garden holding a book in one hand, her other resting on her abdomen, pregnant near the end of her life. She would die in childbirth after remarrying. Her husband, Thomas Seymour, would betray her memory. But not here. Here she is still reading, still ruling her own mind. Her sin living too intelligently for a time that wanted women to be quiet. Now one last figure. England again. The Empress Matilda returned in name only, a whisper behind so many crowns. You find her tomb weathered and quiet. The inscription reads, "Great by birth, greater by marriage, greatest in her offspring." Here lies Matilda, the daughter, wife, and mother of Henry. It says nothing of her battles, her claims, her fierce attempts to wear the crown herself, her sin wanting her name to be on the throne, not just near it. And here the hall finally ends. You've walked through centuries, through blood, silk, ink, and shadow. But now your steps slow. The last candle flickers, and a door opens, not into history, but into rest.